Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Haley Spierbauer. It is a wild fact to consider that I'm just now wrapping season 3 of the Learning Can't Wait podcast. That means there's been 3 seasons of incredible guests, both in one-to-one format, sometimes on a panel, sharing their wisdom on a variety of education topics. I feel beyond grateful for the folks that have walked in and out of this little podcast, sharing their wisdom, experience, expertise, and season 3 is absolutely the pinnacle thus far of excitement. We started off the season with Christina Ishmael, the Deputy Director of EdTech for the United States government, in an episode entitled, Dear Colleague, Where Are We Now? There are so many guests that have come on this podcast sharing their on-the-ground perspective in schools, EdTech surrounding our schools, but now having the opportunity to have the esteemed Christina Ishmael on the podcast to talk about what charges us forward and what we have to consider as ESSER funding is winding down was absolutely a joy. Her energy is infectious. If you've heard her speak before, I am sure you know that fact. So if you missed that episode, go back, rewind, play it again. After that episode, we followed up with a special guest, Nina Reese, the head of the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools in the United States. Nina spoke about the impact that charter schools have had all over the U.S., including incredible results that they garner, and really wanted to clarify the fact that charter schools are public schools. It was a great episode that shared a lot of wisdom with folks that may be unfamiliar with the difference between public and public charter schools. And I, again, recommend you check it out if you didn't give it a chance when it was first released. Episode 3 starred Sarah Williamson and Katie Lash talking about education momentum, 2 very different guests who also host a podcast that is incredible. And I really enjoyed being on a conversation with these women. We talked a lot about women in education. We talked about different movements that we see around the United States. It was a powerful episode with 2 women whom I admire very deeply, and I'm grateful they came on. The following episode was episode 4 with Luis Torres and Lita Casper, serving everyone a close look at community. This episode contained a repeat offender and repeat guest on the Learning Can't Wait podcast, Luis Torres, and also a new guest, Lita Casper, talking about community schools. Both of them work in community schools, one right in the heart of New York City, the other in Minnesota. And both of them had wisdom and insight to share about the experience of bringing a community together, really leaning on resources. And as in his first episode, a lot about hustle culture and how much hustle is required to lead a community school. Episode 5 had Ellen Sherratt, who has been really pushing for an important mission lately. She is the board president of the Teacher Salary Project, who is advocating for paying teachers more money. I was honored to have Ellen on the episode because she spoke deeply and passionately about a topic that is so important to me and the organization that I work for, Full Mind, which is that teachers deserve better. They deserve more respect. They deserve better pay and compensation. And the Teacher Salary Project is really moving that issue forward on Capitol Hill with a variety of sponsors and proponents. And I was really, truly moved by having Ellen on the episode to speak her own perspective and all the momentum she's gained in her effort in the Pay Teachers More episode. Episode 6 had a well-known face, Bart Epstein, talking about eyeing evidence in EdTech. Now, this episode, for those of you that know anything about me and the podcast, I talk a lot about the impact work that happens in EdTech, but Bart Epstein has been leading that work for a very long time at the different organizations that he has led and grown and scaled, but really truly is a passionate proponent of there being a deep, close look at what's happening in schools and the implementation of EdTech
what's driving change for students, and where we as an organization, a society, need to be thinking and what we need to be thinking about as it relates to implementing tools, keeping the ones that are making a difference on students' lives and discarding the ones that aren't. Episode 7 was with Sheldon Eakins. We talked a lot about vulnerability. Sheldon, Dr. Eakins, is an incredible speaker. He speaks all over the country, talks to schools all over about the importance of vulnerability, both from encouraging students to be able to share their authentic selves, and as well from the perspective of being able to really highlight what makes a difference in and around schools from school leadership, which is really something that moved me, because this is really deep work that involves bearing your soul. And Dr. Eakins is really doing a fantastic job of doing that. Episode 8 is with my friend and another fellow podcast host, J.W. Marshall. He talked about the evolution of education. Now, I could have talked about just about anything with JW. We could have talked about AI. I think we talked a little bit about ChatGPT, but held our tongues because the news was still very much moving 100 miles an hour coming out on that topic while JW was on the episode. But it was a really fun episode, high energy. Again, we probably need to record 7 more after that on a variety of topics that really speak to what's happening in education. What are we excited about for the future? Who are some of our touchstones? It was a really fun episode to record. Episode 9 had Evan Stone and Mohan, had Tafshir. It was just a really fun episode called The Art of Advocacy. I have been talking about this episode since the second I recorded it, which for the record was in April. So a couple months now of talking about the chills I felt while recording this episode, and how the work that's being done at the National Parents Union, at Our Turn, at Educators for Excellence is really important work. It's so interesting that the nonprofit space and the funding troubles that they face. One of the questions that we asked as a kind of closing point was, what would we tell philanthropists if we could today, is just how challenging it is to have only one-year funding sources that really make it difficult for nonprofits to show impact, to really dig their heels into the spaces and places where they exist, and to move the needle forward for students and teachers and families, which is so important because change doesn't happen overnight. Episode 10 is with Ash of Started. I loved having Ash on this episode. His episode was called How to Start a Startup. And the work that Started is doing, supporting EdTech founders in their infancy, in their idea phase, is really awesome. I love being involved in EdTech Week, and just generally was excited to hear how Ash got his start and how the genesis of Started began. And if you haven't checked out their work, I would highly recommend it, especially if you're an early stage founder. Episode 11 had Dr. Kelsey Young talking about the research to practice gap. Another episode focused on the importance of evidence in ed tech, how hard it is to plan a program and implement it with fidelity in a way that allows you to truly measure impact and efficacy, but how important that work is in ed tech, especially because schools are spending money on solutions that they hope will work. And we saw a lot of solutions backing out of being able to show impact, both at a very, very public level. And if you really analyze the results carefully coming out of different providers, schools should be able to easily tell whether or not the solution that they've chosen for their district is going to make a difference for children. Episode 12 had Belle Linda Halpern, the founder of Inspiring Educators, in an episode called Where School Leadership and Acting Collide. It was a real pleasure to have Belle on. I am an advisor for Inspiring Educators. I am personally inspired by the work that they do. And having her on was a real joy. Hearing about the origin of Inspiring Educators and the work they did in corporate America and how that translates to supporting school leaders felt really valuable as the year comes to a close. And we know that school leaders are saying this is one of the hardest years they've faced. And so the tips that she shared on that episode were really true, like things that can be enacted immediately. Episode 13 was with Messina Morris, called Real Life and the Metaverse. Messina is a real light in the space of VR and metaverse and education technology. She works at the collegiate level, and it really is an absolute gift that I ran into her at the ASU GSV Summit this past year. And we've stayed connected This was definitely a part one of many episodes. Messina was really showing her authentic self on this episode from the Learning Can't Wait podcast, and I highly recommend you check it out. Episode 14 was Dr. Baron Davis. This is like a playbook for how to hire amazing teachers. It was called How to Hire the Best Teachers. Dr. Davis talks about hiring for skill sets. And forgive me, let me go back. I know Messina Morris is also Dr. Morris, so forgive me for not having given her that title when I shared just a moment ago. Dr. Baron Davis highlights how to hire incredible teachers for their mindsets, their belief systems, and how important and valuable that is. Not just can they teach the skills required for a math class. Like I said, it's a literal playbook on how to hire incredible teachers, and it comes with accompanying op-ed that may be released by the time this episode goes live. But if it's not, I highly recommend you check out this episode and keep your eyes peeled for that op-ed. Next episode is with Adam Ezring. We talked about collaborating on the collaborative. Another incredible nonprofit leader who is really moving forward in trying to standardize practices and ensure that teachers and school leaders and students get the very, very, very best. When I talk to leaders like Adam, I just am at a loss for words sometimes because their deep expertise and knowledge of their space is so evident, even in a 30-minute conversation. And yet again, I left this episode with chills, a real sense of respect that I feel for the work that Adam and the team is doing. Episode 16 with Michelle Neustadt and Barbara Hubert of Brain Pop. A lot of you may know Tim and Moby. This episode called EdTech Sweetheart was a really fun one to record because I have been a Brain Pop user since the beginning of my teaching career, and hearing the learning design behind the tool that so many know and love was really incredibly special. And both of them have infectious energy. I was so grateful they came on the episode. I know that doing what they do is hard work. They've been recognized time and time again by various outlets for the incredible product that they've built. But hearing from them, what inspires them, what they keep at the front of their mind when they're building this tool was awesome. Really, really awesome, as I said, as a former user or current user, even with my kids, of Brain Pop. And last but certainly not least, the inimitable Marlon Stiles came on the episode 17. I loved having him on. I heard that when I was just in Philadelphia at ISTE, I missed him, but Marlon spoke about the Learning Center Collaborative, their work as a superintendent at Middletown City School District. It was just a wild episode where we heard about how incredibly inspiring and important it is to unify communities, to reform education. Truly honored to be able to be in the same space and place as Mr. Stiles. I know that this is not the last I'll want to talk to them on the Learning Can't Wait podcast, but it surely was a great episode. And with every episode, I hope that you go back and you check them out. I am so honored to have wrapped up season 3, but let me tell you, I'm already recording episodes for season 4, which will release later this summer. And I know it's going to be another set of incredible educators, both in the space and around the space, that are moving the needle for students. And I'm so grateful you've been on this journey with me. And I can't wait for you to hear more episodes very shortly.
Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.